Please welcome Mike Chitwood, Volusia County Sheriff, Cheryl Dorsey, retired LAPD Sergeant, and Charles Ellison, WURD host.
An idea we should steal, changing police culture. Maybe it's not really about reforming police departments, changing policies, or even defunding, as many have said. Maybe ultimately it's about how we change police culture. But what is that? How deep do we go? And is that the ultimate fix or path towards better policing and public safety paradigm in America? So joining us to explore that is retired Los Angeles Police Department Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey, a longtime advocate and leader on this subject, as well as author of the critically acclaimed Black and Blue. Also, we have Volusia County, Florida, elected Sheriff Mike Chitwood, also a former highly decorated Philadelphia police officer whose dad, Mike Chitwood Sr., is the most decorated cop in Philadelphia history and is also the former chief of the Upper Darby, PA police force. Okay, so let's have the professionals talk about this. Sergeant Dorsey, we'll start with you. What do you think we mean by police culture? We first need a definition, an operative definition, to explore this topic a little bit more deeper.
Well, when I think of the term police culture, I think of, I wasn't in the military, but I know that, during my time on the police department, there was a lot of talk of camaraderie and team building and just, thinking kind of like one, right? One big blue family, thus, the blue line that so many people have angst about. And so it's the way cops think. It's our swag. It's the way we move. Sometimes it's just the way we dress when we come to work. People can see us when we're off duty sometimes and think, are you a cop? Or ask or say, you're a cop, right? Because it's just something that we exude. And so some of it is good. I think the camaraderie, the team building, the one for all for one is good. But then every now and again, a little area needs to be just retweaked. And I think by and large, most officers are there for the right reason or doing the right thing or professional, compassionate, ethical in the discharge of their duties. But we've seen examples of that small minority that's getting all of the attention that's making people think this is our occupation as a whole.
What say you, Sheriff, on that definition and how do we operate with that realization of some of those realities that Sergeant Dorsey just outlined?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Sergeant Dorsey more. I think she hit the nail right on the head there. I can just tell you anecdotally, I left Philadelphia in 2005 after nearly 18 years. Took over in Shawnee, Oklahoma, was there for a year as a police chief, about 50 cops, city of 35,000 people, and then got hired in Daytona Beach. 250 cops, very diverse city, 6 million visitors a year is what we got there. So we had a lot of tourist crime. But the sheriff's office, which I now head, 1,000 employees, $100 million budget, really had a big influence on the culture. Most of the other police agencies in this county, and there's 12 of them, modeled their policies after the sheriff's office. And the sheriff's office had a reputation when I first became the police chief in Daytona in 2006 as being the Marines. When we land, we restore order. We're not confined by a mayor. We're not confined by a city manager. Our sheriff is elected. And that attitude caused a lot of angst in the African-American community and caused me a lot of angst in return that they would come in and basically whack the hornet's nest and then leave. And I was dealt with getting the hornets back into the nest. So our philosophy in Daytona was a lot different than the sheriff's office was, because that's what the culture in the sheriff's office was. This county was one of the last counties to stop firing at fleeing felons. People would chase a fleeing felon into Volusia County knowing that the sheriff here would allow them to open fire on a speeding car through a neighborhood. So that's when I get elected, that's the culture that I'm coming into. The motto in the training section was confidence in the line of fire. Everybody out in training, that's the shirt that they wore. before you even got hired here in the sheriff's office, you had to take a shooting test. And if you passed the shooting test, you were allowed to move through the processing. And I'm saying to myself, and I've been a cop now for 33 years, I've had to fire my gun twice. And I think that that's a rarity when you compare it to a lot of other people who never had to fire their gun. So why are we investing in this warrior, us against them? Let's be able to shoot the wings off of a fly from 1,000 yards mentality.
How do we go about making those real fundamental adjustments or restructuring of policing in America, of those police departments, of systems like that BOD, for example, that you dealt with, or even the sorts of systems that have been around for a long time, traditions, even norms that Sheriff Chitwood has had to deal with in Volusia County, Florida. I mean, this is a real big lift here.
Well, listen, I mean, first we just have to be honest, right? And let's not pretend that it's still not a good old boys network, because it is. I think in those few places where you have women who are heading police departments and are sheriffs or police chiefs, I mean, I think girls rock. I think we do it better. We just are naturally set up, constituted differently from men. I think because of our nature, we are nurturers and caregivers, and we want to make sure that everybody is good. And so I know that this is an easy fix if my male superiors wanted to fix it, because every police chief was once a police officer. And so you've grown up in the culture and you know what it is, and you know that there are bad doers. There's talk of police reform and a national registry. And I say, okay, that sounds good and sexy, but truthfully, do we really need a national registry, a list of officers who are misbehaving? Because every department knows who those officers are. We had certainly a list during my time on the LAPD. I think it was 36 that were on that list back in the day who were cutting up. We knew who George Floyd's murderer, Derek Chauvin, was. Clearly, he had to be on a list. He had 18 personnel complaints. We knew who Garrett Roth, the officer who shot Rayshard Brooks, was. He had to have been on a list. He had over a dozen personnel complaints. And so unless and until police chiefs want to have that honest discussion and create safe zones is the other thing for officers who do see misconduct, we have a duty to report on the Los Angeles Police Department. We've always had that. If you witness misconduct and you don't stop it, then you too are engaging in misconduct. And so it's a very easy fix if you create a safe zone and know the officers can rely that they're not going to be retaliated against, because retaliation is a real thing. And there are ways that a police chief, a watch commander, your sergeant can touch you. And there's not much that you can say to prove it's retaliation for speaking out in a way that's contradictory to the groupthink. And so that's one of the very first things that needs to happen. Admit there's a problem, otherwise there's nothing to fix. Have an honest discussion about it, and then create those safe zones so officers can report malfeasance and not fear retribution.
All right. Yeah. Sheriff Chitwood, so girls rock, right?
Hey, I have three daughters, and two of my three grandchildren are daughters. If I don't agree with the sergeant, I'll never live it down.
Right. I just wanted to make sure my three daughters heard me giving a second to that motion.
Exactly.
Girls do rock, right? But so, you've talked about, and you've written about, Sheriff, in the Philadelphia Citizen, you've talked about changing the culture and mindset from that of a warrior to more of a guardian. Like the police culture could be more of a guardian type culture. So how do we go about that? Because that sounds like a big leap.
Yeah, real quick, I want to touch on two things that the sergeant said. She talked about female police chiefs. Female police chief in Atlanta, female police chief in Seattle, female police chief in Portland, Oregon, who I believe in my heart were absolute change agents and were doing a great job. When this summer of unrest began, all three got sacked. And that's a huge loss for our profession, that mayors don't have the intestinal fortitude to stand up and see what they have. And we're in a worse place in policing because of what had happened. And the second thing I wanted to hit on real quick, when we talk about problem officers, the problem is our unions. Our unions rally around bad employees and defend them to the death. So there's your problem with the culture, because when you want to change and you're a change agent, you have the unions. And to get back to that Chauvin guy up there in Minnesota, the union protected those people. So now what it comes down to is your chief or sheriff that had the intestinal fortitude to have strong leadership, a vision, support by their councils, city council, county council, whatever it may be, and go for the long haul. Who are we hiring? How are we training? How are we disciplining? And try to turn that. It's like turning an aircraft carrier and so you can launch into the wind. But for me, the unions are the biggest obstacles to changing culture. Here we did it. We trained the way we changed the way we train. When you walk into the training facility, it's enter to learn, leave to serve. We bounced out all the guys and girls that were training in this warrior mentality of shoot, 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 shoot. It's us against them. And we brought in de-escalation tactics. We brought in racial justice training. We've got different people from community coming in. We're trying to recruit people that have critical reasoning ability skills. I don't care. I could teach you to shoot. I can't teach you how to reason in stressful situations without resorting to violence. So there are some of the things that we're trying to roll out. And for the most part, statistics are backing us up. I mean, use of forces are down by 50%. Complaints against police are down by like 80%. Crime is down, which is amazing. Crime's down by like 48%, and arrests are down by 50%. And the clearance rate, which is our ability to solve a crime once it occurred, for a department, we're hovering around 50% for Part 1 crime. So I'm looking at us as we're becoming laser focused on when a crime is committed. And all of those things are good things. Less injuries to officers, less injuries to people we arrest, less arrests, less use of force. I think we're on to something, but we got a long way to go.
How do we make policing more thoughtful, as the sheriff was saying, or as thoughtful as professions like, I don't know, law, medicine, or science?
Well, listen, I don't say no to anything, but if sense were common, everybody would have it. And you just can't teach it, right? It's either in your core, empathy, compassion, relatability. You can't really open up a manual and read it and get it. The other thing that's problematic when you think of the culture is the ribbing or the hazing that goes on within police departments. I've sat in roll call rooms as a patrol officer and as a patrol supervisor, later in my career in the back of the room with the old salts who are talking a lot of mess to the youngsters. And, if you're not of that mindset, that warrior mindset, in some instances, in some roll calls, you get ribbed, you get talked about. The other thing that I think needs to happen is, I think, again, most officers come on for the right reason. You can be jaded very easily by a senior training officer. I think officers should be reevaluated. And I just say every 2 years because of the things that we're exposed to in patrol. I remember seeing a jumper as a supervisor. And after this kid jumped off the building, I went back to the station and told my watch commander, I think we should have BSS come and be available for anybody who wants to see it, because I was troubled having seen this young man jump off a roof. And by the time my male officers got there, everybody said, hey, Sarge, I'm good. Nothing to talk about here. And so it's not sexy to self-report. Sometimes it's because of fear of, what might happen if you tell a professional what you're really thinking about. Again, back to those safe zones. And so we should be concerned about our employees as police officers like any other corporation is. They have employee assistance programs and they help they help employees who are struggling. We don't do that on the police department. And I think that's part and parcel as to why suicide rates are so high. We don't talk about it, but it's a thing. And that too should be acknowledged.
Yeah. That raises another interesting question, Sheriff, too. Because you're working in Florida, Volusia County, and Florida being one of those deep southern states. You're in Central Florida, if I'm not mistaken. There have been questions. There have been some investigation that's taken place. I remember a few years ago, I think federal law enforcement, the FBI was looking into this. I think Congressman Keith Ellison, who's now Attorney General in Minnesota, was looking into this as well, like the worry or the concerns or trends of white nationalists kind of quietly finding their way into police departments and agencies, quietly trying to infiltrate those departments. Is that something that you worry about? Maybe one thing that keeps you up? How do you screen for it?
Yeah, that's just so you know, historically, Volusia County was the last county in the state of Florida to integrate. And they had to integrate because the governor threatened to send in the National Guard if they didn't do so. So I'm very aware of our history here in Volusia County. One of the things that we do is, and again, I don't have an x-ray machine to look into your soul and see who you are, but you look for red flags. What are the tattoos? We want to see, if you apply to us, I want to see all the tattoos that you have, because that ink tells a story. It's not that you fought in Afghanistan or Iraq and you're commemorating lost comrades in battle. I try to stay away from 19 and 20-year-olds because when I hire them, they implode. So we try to look for people that have some life experience in dealing with different cultures, different populations, different races, different religions, because those are the folks that are more well-rounded and more adaptive to this guardian mentality as opposed to a warrior one.
Hey, also what comes to mind, Sheriff, and how police departments, police agencies like yours collaborate with other agencies or other institutions that are focused on other verticals in that same government. And what I mean by that is, like, for example, with the Walter Wallace Jr. situation in Philly, there's a big conversation about, okay, well, we don't want to put a whole lot of pressure on, obviously police having to be both, beat officers, but at the same time, social workers, because they don't have that kind of capacity or training. But, they could have counselors, mental health counselors on patrol with them, or, being brought along to answer those types of calls when there's some sort of mental health element or factor that's playing into that call taking place. I wonder, what's that collaboration look like, or could there be a better collaborative framework between police departments and other agencies like public health agencies, mental health agencies? For example, in Philadelphia, I was just having a conversation yesterday about how the police could be good at sort of identifying where illegal dumping sites are, because there's scientific evidence linkage between when a neighborhood has a lot of trash in it or a lot of illegal dumping going on, that can actually be a signal or an indicator for bad actors to commit more crimes. The more you clean a neighborhood, the less crime you get. So maybe police could be useful in that respect, and that kind of makes their job easier. What's that collaborative framework look like to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with everything that you had just said. From the mental health aspect, while we don't have a PhD in clinical psychology, forming coalitions, the same way we attack gun violence. Gun violence is a public safety epidemic. It's not just a police matter. It requires all the disciplines to come together. And what we're doing here is we roll out a pilot program in my biggest district, the city of Deltona, 100,000 residents, obviously, most calls for service are there. We trained, everybody went through an additional training. They went through their additional 80 hours of CIT training, critical incident training, and then they went through an additional 80 that was put on by Stuart Markman, which is our mental health folks. What are your resources? What can you do? What shouldn't you do? Who should you contact? What are the things to look out for? So that was phase one. Phase two, every supervisor was about to be given in that district an iPad. And that iPad is linked to the on-call clinical psychologist or psychiatrist who will have access to the files of the folks where we have frequent flyer calls to in Deltona. So if they know they're going to see Mike Chitwood, and he's been out here, it's called Baker Act in Philadelphia, it's a 302. They're able to log on with the clinical psychologist who's on call and say, hey, we're getting a phone call again for Chitwood. He's armed with a knife and he's threatening to kill himself and his family. And they could get back to the supervisor and say, okay, don't send a marked car. Don't do lights and sirens. This is something we have to send plain clothes, and we'll have a team to come out and meet you. Obviously, that works if it's not a dynamic situation. And the third component of that is all of my dispatchers are about to go under an 80, I think it's 60 hours actually, a training course that when a call comes in for somebody in mental crisis, they're going to be able, when they get that 911 call, to discern where is this going to go. Is it going to call for a uniform response? Is it only going to call for a mental health team to respond? Is it going to call for a social worker to respond? So I think one good thing that's going to come out of this is that we all have to shoulder the burden together when it comes to mental health crises, when it comes to what you're talking about, which is a common sense thing. If kids grow up in a community full of squalor, they think that's normal. So why not get rid of that squalor and see some type of development come in to these neighborhoods in the long run? That's the best cop in the world, is economic development, in my opinion.
You want to reform. You definitely want to change or restructure the way that policing is done in a place like Volusia County, Florida. People have created that defund maxim as sort of a litmus test for, okay, well, how far do you want to take that reform or that restructuring? So that can become problematic to you when you're trying to seek re-election, right?
Correct. People in our community, whether they're in the richest section of this community or the poorest section, want one thing. They want the same exact thing. They want good, clean, honest, transparent, accountability police work. They want police in their communities. That's what they want. But they also come to me and say, I don't want my taxes raised to pay for all these new initiatives that you're putting in place. We want you to be fiscally responsible when you're doing these things. We have no problem giving you what you need, but at the same token, we expect you to be fiscally responsible and provide the best level of service you can to us.
Do we need to kind of move in a different way as far, messaging and optics is everything. And obviously these conversations can get real political and politically toxic and volatile, but we know where that's coming from on some levels, that kind of maxim, that kind of slogan, defunding the police. It's coming from a good place. It's coming from a place of frustration, but do we need to change the direction or trajectory of that conversation?
People need to be very careful what they ask for, because a lot of organizations, and I'll tell you what's going on real briefly here in Los Angeles with the whole defund the police thing, because some folks think that defunding the police means taking money away and therefore you have less officers on the street. As a matter of fact, one of our activist leaders even said that they were all for defunding the police department if it means less police officers on the street to interact less often with the community. Well, that's just nonsensical, because what's actually happening on the Los Angeles Police Department, our mayor has required our police chief to do $150 million cut to the budget. And so what's happening is there are some officers that are going to leave, but it's going to be the old guys who've been beaten at the trough and are eligible to retire anyway. They're not out in patrol. It's going to be officers taken out of coveted positions, detective assignments. We're going to lose expertise in our elite unit, robbery homicide division, while homicides are up. And those officers are going to be then moved back into patrol. So it's not going to be less officers on the streets. It's going to be just other officers from different places. And then you're going to have a situation where there's going to be certain calls that we're just not going to be sent to. And our police chief said that if you get involved in a traffic accident, you're going to have to go home and get on your computer and complete your own accident investigation report. And what people don't understand is that sounds okay. I had someone ask me on a social media platform, why do the police need to come anyway? Well, have you ever seen two combatants at the scene of a traffic collision? There's a reason why we respond to that kind of stuff. And so it's going to affect areas where there's the most need, because in the more affluent areas, they have, in addition to LAPD, private security. And so they probably don't often call us anyway. They call their special security services when they have a need for something. And it's going to affect Black and brown communities where the police are needed. And now they're just not going to come because our police chief has said, I'm making some cuts. I'm not sending officers, and I'm going to figure out more opportunities to not send the police when you're needed.
Retired LAPD Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey joining us here for our Ideas We Should Steal conversation, and also Volusia County, Florida Sheriff Mike Chitwood joining us from Volusia County, also a former retired Philadelphia police officer, highly decorated Philadelphia police officer joining us here. He's contributed to the Philadelphia Citizen talking about the warrior culture in policing, changing that to a guardian culture. Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey, you can go to, I believe it's sergeantcheryldorsey.com for more there. Longtime leader on this subject, and she's author of the critically acclaimed book, Black and Blue.
A special thank you to our sponsors.